Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the State of the Nation on NjenjeMedia TV. Today, I will have a distinguished guest, as our schedule had said. In a bold political move, Professor Prof. Utomi, a former presidential advisor, presidential candidate, and a renowned political economist, unveiled a shadow government under the Big Tent coalition. This initiative to monitor government actions and propose alternative solutions across critical sectors. However, the Department of State Security, the DSS, has filed a lawsuit against Professor Utomi, arguing that the formation of such a parallel structure is unconstitutional and poses a threat to national security. The legal action has sparked nationwide debate. Senior advocates of Nigeria, for instance, Adeboro Adamson, supports the DSS move, emphasizing the agency's mandate to look at such issues and target at subversions. Critics, on the other hand, have argued that the DSS actions may infringe upon democratic freedom and stifle dissent. Amid these controversies, discussions about the 2027 elections and potential political coalitions are gaining momentum. This conversation this evening promises to shed light on the complexities of governance, democracy, and political activism in our nation. To do justice to this conversation this evening, I have the rare privilege of bringing my guest this evening, Professor Prof. Utomi. Professor, you're welcome to NjenjeMedia TV.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be able to join you.
Thank you, Prof. We are slightly behind schedule. We had a technology glitch. It appears everything is glitched now. We had the INEC glitch, jam glitch. Now it's a glitch on this platform. Let me fire the first salvo, Prof. Nice to see you again. You look well. You've been keeping well, Prof. Let me quickly start. Your proposal for a shadow government has sparked significant debate with some. People would argue that it's neither here nor there. Some call it a symbolic gesture. I want to ask, can you elaborate on the specific challenges in Nigerians' current governance?
Yes, okay. Right, not a problem. Democracy remarkably has been described as the worst form of government, but for the rest. If you go back to Winston Churchill, and all democracies are a work in progress. What you need to do is gauge whether it's delivering on its purpose, and then you look for ways to make it better deliver on its purpose. By the way, I am slightly bemused by all the conversation around this so-called shadow cabinet, because it's been around for more than 15 years. I first tabled this as an alternative in 2007, after the fairly shambolic elections of 2007. I thought that we needed to have a way that the opposition and citizens directly, even beyond parties and politicians, can engage in keeping government accountable. And so I suggested to a group of opposition politicians, if people's memories go back, after those elections, and observers came and we were dealing with I ran for president that year. Most of the press conferences that we held to the international community with international media had me as the spokesperson. Seated to my right typically was the then Vice President Atiku Abubakar, who was a candidate. Sitting to my left was Muhammadu Buhari, who was also a candidate. Many people will recall that the debate of that year was General Buhari and myself that debated. And so we're all trying to work together. And during that point, I suggested that it might be a good thing to have a shadow team that shadows how the government that had emerged functions. And even more interestingly, a year or so into that administration, the then president, Shehu Umaru Yaradua, invited me to a meeting at the villa. It was a Friday, and I think all the people who were there will remember at the time, David Dedevier was his chief of staff, and David Dedevier will recall my arrival at that meeting with a friend. And President Yaradua, polite and decent man, as always, it's a sad thing for our country he didn't leave, because he could have been one of the best presidents we ever had. President Yaradua comes out of the meeting to say to me, welcome. I'm in the meeting, and it was a meeting of the economic team, actually. Welcome, but I want a really long discussion with you. It's not something that we will do in the office with people interfering. And he went back into the meeting, finished off the meeting shortly after, and people who were at the meeting were leaving. Several of them were people I knew very well. Remi Babalola, who was Minister of State in Finance, came over and said hello to me, and we chatted. Steve Oronsaye came, Emeka Eze of Due Process came, and after that, I went to the residence, and President Yaradua then dismissed everybody. I remember the last two people who left the residence that day were Yoda Yaradua, who was Group Managing Director of NNPC at the time, and Michael Andoaka, who was Attorney General.
Attorney General, yeah.
When they both then left, Yaradua ushered my friend and I into a room. And when we then sat down, he said to me, Professor, tell me, what is the problem with Nigeria? And of course, when I start talking on that matter, it's hard to stop. I went on for nearly 2 hours. To my amazement, President Yaradua didn't blink, he didn't sleep, he listened through. When I stopped, he said, you know, that's why many people say that, you know, you should be in government because you know the problems. You have the clear ideas about the solution. I said to him, no, I'm not looking for a job. Trust me, I'm a patriot. You can call me anytime you want, 2 a.m., 3 a.m. I'll give you the benefit of my opinion on any subject you want. He said, no, but you can do a lot more good inside the government, in the cabinet, than you can outside. And I said to him, you know, I've just formed a shadow government. If I join your government, then I will be abandoning my own side to join your side. And we kind of laughed about it. And he said, no, but seriously, yes, the idea of a shadow government is a good thing for democracy. And I think all of us should be doing everything that we can to help deepen the democracy. But really, I think this country needs you inside of government now. And I said to him, I thank you for your kind consideration. But you see, the nature of the post-colonial state in Africa is such that many times people who have strong opinions, who have critical opinions, are attracted into government. And then they are either made to burn their bridges, and then their voices are squelched. Or, you know, the nature of this thing, I said in political science, is called the cooperative state. You incorporate, and then you squelch the voice. That I don't want my voice to be squelched. And so I want to assure you, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., you can call me and you will get the benefit of my input. And he insisted. It was a very interesting meeting. Thank God the person who was there is still alive and can corroborate everything I'm saying here. He said, look, but you, no matter how wonderful that input you make from outside, oppositions, shadow government, and all of that, if you were inside government, you would really have significant impact. Given the knowledge you have, given your passion and commitment to this country, you would have a lot more impact inside of government. This gentleman who was with me jumped in. I said to him, Your Excellency, don't mind him, don't mind him. We'll make him accept the offer. We will make him accept. And
Okay.
yeah, we may mean very well, but this is not exactly how I had hoped things will work out, because it would not. The problem that I have is, people can mean well, and then the system prevents that meaning well. He says, no, trust me. I really mean well. So I said to him, look, if you can appoint 7 good people, leave your other people that PDP brought to be sharing contracts. Just find 7 good people, give them certain kind of strategic ministries that lead in policy, and I will give them the benefit of my views. There is, without any holding back. He says, okay, why don't you bring those 7 good people, find them yourself, and come with them into the cabinet? At that point, I was almost literally trapped by Yaradua. And I said to him, okay, let me go and think of it. I can't, if I'm going to get quality people representing the country that I believe will make a difference for our country, I'm going to go back and think about it. He said, fine. So I went back to Lagos. I gave some thought to it. I wrote down 7 names, and I gave them to Steve Oronsai to give him. That was the very last time President Yaradua and I spoke, because I think he never got that list. I don't know, maybe somebody can ask Oronsai, I don't know. But some very senior person once laughed years later when I was joking about government and said, I think Yaradua went to his grave thinking that you snubbed him. I don't think he got that your list. But that's neither here nor there. But, a couple of days after that meeting with President Yaradua, I was in Abuja, and I had gone to mass, morning mass at the Papal Nunciature. And I was praying at the end of mass. And the late Professor Akunyilidora came and tapped me in the back and said, come outside, come outside. And she said to me in Igbo, you turned down invitation to the cabinet again. I said, who told you that? Because I'd never discussed that meeting with the president, with anybody. And Professor Kunyili said to me that she and Chief Tony Aneni sat down with President Yaradua and were discussing the future of things. And my name was repeated, and they both encouraged him to try and call me to have that conversation that we had, so that they knew about that meeting. I said, oh, really? Well, I said, I didn't close any door. We're still talking. So anyhow, just to tell you that I started this shadow government idea as far back as 2008. 2008. And I actually discussed it with the incumbent president of Nigeria. So this is not some secret thing filed away somewhere.
Okay. Now, let me, before I get to my next question, did you, from the story you just told now, in looking back, reflecting on that, how do you feel not accepting that call to duty that President Yaradua offered you?
You see, and it comes back to the problem we have right now in Nigeria. The crisis of Nigeria is a crisis of elite. Elites that are always looking out for themselves and not for Nigeria. My big question at that point was, what will best serve the development of democracy in Nigeria? My jumping into a government, and if I didn't have any strong guarantees, don't forget that I'd been in government before. one of the reasons I was ever so careful about whether or not I accept a position in government was my first experience. I was a very young man, 27 years old, fresh PhD, and I was on TV. I was talking about policy matters, tax policy, majorly. Among those watching, the vice president of the country, Dr. Alex Ekweme, he sends for me, and then he talks with the president. And then very casually, 2 weeks later, I was asked to replace an old teacher of mine from the university, Professor Denigwe, who was an advisor to the president. And when I got into government, we had permanent secretaries that we worked with. And given the ideals that I came with, at that age, every day I will have X number of new ideas of what we should do, what the government must do in its recovery mode. And the permanent secretary that I was working with, a gentleman called Asum Bur. Mr. Bur, when I finish with what we must do, we'll say, you see, these are wonderful ideas. But you see, if you do this, you will step on the feet of these people. If you do that, you will step on the this of that people. So one day I said to him, Mr. Boo, is there anything that it is possible to do? Whatever you do, you must step. Yes, you must step on some foot. So let's get work done. I mean, the luck that I had, unfortunately, again, time was not on our side because a coup took place not so long after. I took those same ideas that Mr. Boo would tell me I will stand on this person's feet and on that other person's directly to Dr. Alex Ekweme, and Dr. Ekweme will say, yes, we have to find ways of doing it. This is why we're here. And then, very interestingly, this is another part of the story. Some gentleman, if he's watching, who was a chief press secretary to President Shagari, will recall. President Shagari, most Nigerians never knew this, was a chain smoker. But he never smoked in public. So Nigerians don't even know that he smoked. And also, he had such a respect for the office of the president that he didn't smoke inside the office of the president. So anytime he wanted to smoke, he would come outside. And from my window in the Dam Barracks, I could see him when he came out. And I would typically quickly run down and try and engage him in conversation. And I found him enormously receptive of those ideas that Asamburu was telling me, yeah, I will step on this and step on that. So one lesson I learned from that exposure was, if you are going to go into government, if you don't have a strong ear of the people really in charge, if you don't have a strong team that you're working with, don't bother. Unless your aim is to go and get power and influence and all of that. But if your aim is to move society forward, make sure that you have a strong team. So when President Yaradua made the point he made at the end of our long conversation, I saw it meaningful. And I if my list had reached him, and if, as he said, I should come with those 8 people, I would have gone. But that was the stage we were at when he took ill and he then passed away. So it wasn't like I didn't want to serve my country, but that I wanted to make sure that it was not, a game that I just go in there, enjoy power, and not make the change. Making the change and helping people's lives get better was more important to me than having a title and position.
Okay. Now, if I come back to the issue of DSS, and we are aware that the DSS has challenged the legality of the shadow government, citing Section 1, subsection 2 of the Nigerian Constitution, which states that the Federal Republic of Nigeria shall not be governed except by authority of the Constitution. How do you respond to accusations that your proposal could be interpreted as unconstitutional or even, treasonous, as some have suggested by someone like I mentioned it before, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Adaboro Adamson, that mentioned that what you have done could be tantamount to treason?
I think people should go and rethink how they understand things. What I suggested will have no authority whatsoever. And as I said, it has been in existence. This is the third reconstitution of the shadow team, and we have never taken any part of Nigeria to govern in 15 years. It is simply a method of citizens speaking to issues in public life, no different than Patito's gang. And in fact, Patito's gang was an outlet for the conversations of the shadow cabinet that we have had over the years. We take those ideas, we make it available to society to say, this is what is wrong with your country. This is how things can be done better. These are the options. Government is free to take it, it's free not to take it, but you have no authority whatsoever. So anybody talking about it as involving taking authority is talking about the kind of things that the people who are currently in government proposed under Jonathan. Because under Jonathan, they said they would form an alternative government. We have no fear, no need or desire to form an alternative government. We as citizens just want to make better ideas for governing available to those who govern and to hold them accountable, because they have a sacred trust to the people, because they are essentially just agents. Anybody in authority is an agent. In the agency function, those who have made you an agent have a duty, moral, and in more ways, to hold you accountable for the errand you are running on their behalf. So this is essentially a discussion group of quality thinking to lay the alternatives available to society to use to make their choices. It is not a government in exile, which they proposed.
Yeah.
It is not anything. It is simply a panel of thinking people suggesting ways to govern the country.
Now, if we look at procedural issues here, let me, for the benefit of our viewers here, one, have you been invited or have you been written by the DSS to the DSS for the first time without necessarily coming to your house, or probably climb the ceiling or break the walls as normally the case, but in this case they've chosen to go civil, not even criminal. And do you think that's a change in the psyche of those that govern, understanding and knowing their antecedents?
Well, I don't know what was operating in their heads when they made the choices that they made, and so I'm not in a position to counsel on that. But whatever it is, I think it's good for Nigeria. It's good for Nigeria that we can go to court and trash these things. You see, I was saying to somebody just this morning that this seems like providential. My academic work has generally been in the area of institutions and economic performance. How do institutions evolve? How do you get those boundaries within which conduct is acceptable, and outside of it, sanctions come, which is what leads to great economic development. If you read all the great thinkers on development, whether from the historians like Neil Ferguson, the economic historians like Douglas North, it is essentially from people testing these issues. That's why I love Ganifa and me, go to court, that you begin to build those boundaries. So I think this opportunity to go to court is wonderful for us to build institutions for Nigeria. So I welcome it. I love them for having done that.
Okay, aside the way you've explained this now, I mean, it's basically visible for everyone to see what the intentions are, what you're trying to achieve. But many also argue that, hey, if we take a back step, we understand that shadow government is normally associated to a parliamentary system of government, not the presidential that we have. Many have argued. We've seen couple of individuals on televisions arguing that that's why the Americans do not have shadow government, because that's where we learned that from. Some argue that if you go to the United Kingdom, obviously they do have shadow cabinet. and they get paid as well, to do certain job. And because whenever the new government comes, if they are the one that won, I mean, those people in the shadow government are the ones that you're going to see forming government. So in this case, don't you think that the government is in this case right, that shadow government is something that is not associated to presidential system of government, that is only for parliamentary system?
Who devised presidential system of government? Who devised parliamentary system of government? People creatively work out ways that work for their society. It doesn't mean that we're slaves to Americans and the way they've chosen, or we're slaves to the British and the ways they've chosen. No, we have a right to create our own ways to make our own country work for good. Now, South Africans, what kind of system do they have? Is it presidential or is it parliamentary?
Well,
Does the president of South Africa not go in for question time in parliament?
Yeah.
Because they have chosen a way that will work for them. Why do the French have a president and a prime minister? Because they have found a way that works for them. People who say these things are being deliberately mischievous. They just try to find justification for squelching freedom of expression. Biggest challenge in Nigeria today is squelching of alternative views. And those who, out of partisan and whatever other emotional inclinations, don't want opinions expressed, run into the laggards they used to say about South Africa in those days, and find excuses like, oh, this is the way Americans do it, this is the way the British do it, and we took the American system. Who said we should take the American system? Were we not in the British system before? We woke up one day and said this thing wasn't working for us, let's try it that way. And it is not true that the only two ways are the American system and the British system. We have just seen from my mentioning South Africa and France that there are so many in-between ways. And we as Nigerians who are in the middle of looking at constitutional reform, I was in a meeting just today, a Zoom meeting of the Patriots Constitutional Conference Planning Committee. And so Nigeria hasn't settled for a constitution. Most Nigerians agree that its 79 constitution is inadequate or inappropriate for where we're going. And so in that search for ways, this comes up. Now, when you get a situation where people are jumping from political parties all into a ruling party, then it accentuates the need for a citizen-based approach to holding government accountable, because you can't trust politicians. The politicians, driven by self-interest, don't really think of the interest of the people. So you need for a more citizens-based approach. And I go back again. In 1985, there was a conference in Nairobi, Kenya. It was sponsored by the Aga Khan Foundation, brought African countries together to look at what was called a tripartite approach to government. That conference, Nigeria was represented, the private sector team was led by Chief Ernest Shonekan, who was then Chief Executive of UAC of Nigeria. The public sector team was led by AAA, Alhaji Abubakar Alhaji, who was Permanent Secretary in Finance, and the NGO sector, what was called private development agencies in those days, was led by Dr. Jack. And when they returned from that conference, a group of us joined them to found the Enabling Environment Forum. And the idea was for a tripartite approach to government. That has unfortunately not materialized well. The NESG, Nigeria Economic Summit Group, crystallized out of the Enabling Environment Forum. And what we must do is try to look at ways government can work for us. It is clear that our political class cannot be relied on to safeguard the interest of the people because of their personal greed, their lack of understanding of democracy. So they're all jumping into one party and they're saying, look, China is a one-party state. Is it not doing well for China? Let them agree to line up to be shot like the Chinese who are corrupt. Let's begin to shoot them. And we will have nobody in government. Let them agree to show the discipline that Xi has shown to travel from local government all the way to where he is. But they won't. Yet they say they like the Chinese system. They should stop deceiving themselves and looking for loopholes to create systems that don't work for the Nigerian people. We must say to them, stand up now, or shut up and get out.
Mm. Now, Prof, given the current economic struggles and the lack of a strong opposition, I think we would all agree with that, as highlighted by some government critics. So, how do you plan to build these public and political support for your shadow government? Do you see this as a step towards forming a broader coalition, or is this initiative primarily meant to pressure the government, the current administration, into better governance?
Well, the goal is completely different from the coalition building. That I know that one is going on. I've attended some of those meetings myself. But when I saw the everybody jumping into one party, I thought to myself, there's no opposition left in the country. We better sensitize the people to the fact that there is still the possibility that government can be held accountable. And we have had this already running for many years, going back to 2007, 2008. Let's reshuffle that group again. I mean, I tell people that this group, which has been around for so long, I mean, there's some people who have been in it for that long. I mean, I take somebody like Dr. Jerome Okolo, who is our shadow person for power. He's been in it for more than 12 years in this shadow team. I remind people that Dr. Leke Piton, who was Commissioner for Health under Tinubu in Lagos, was in the first shadow team for several years, was our health spokesperson. And we held those meetings in my office in Lagos, real meetings. And then we took the ideas that came from them into Patito's gang to express to the Nigerian people the alternatives that are there. So that same purpose remains today as it was in 2008, to make government realize that the fact that everybody has joined the APC does not mean that the Nigerian people cannot hold it accountable.
Okay, let's quickly, move towards, let's look at this government. As we know, the President Tinubu's administration has been in power. Next week, it's going to be on the clock 2 years. And many Nigerians are grappling with economic hardship, including inflation and the fallout from the subsidy removal. How would you evaluate the APC government since 2023? And do you think the current challenges strengthens the case for a unified opposition coalition in 2027 election?
Let me say that I am always driven by principles. One of the things that came out of this announcement of the shadow cabinet was people saying, but this man used to speak good of Tinubu, and all of that. Is it just speak good? I gave a great deal of my time, my energies, my intellectual resources to supporting the Tinubu government from 1999. My friendship with President Obasanjo, which included the fact that I was chair of his policy advisory team as candidate in 1998, was ruined because he learned that I was helping out with the Tinubu government to be. And he was so upset. And I used to get calls from OBS Equesili, from Waziri Ibrahim, the late Waziri Ibrahim. Why did you join AG? Baba is so upset about it. And I said, that's his business. My business as a citizen is to offer whatever I have to make for the good of the country. If Tinubu has invited me to help out, why not? Why should I, because I'm friendly with him, Obasanjo, refuse to help my country? So something has gone wrong in our understanding of politics in our country. I tell this story all the time, that you don't have to be an enemy because you take a different point of view. You can look at the common good and think, no, we should do it differently. Chief H.O. Davis, his son, Utomi, is a good friend of mine. We all went to school back in the 60s together. Chief H.O. Davis was in a different political party from Zik. But literally most evenings, Zik will come back from campaigning, go to Chibejo Davis' house, pick him up, and they will drive to the tennis club, play tennis together, drink beer after tennis. He will drop him off and go back home. And the following day, they will both campaign on different sides. Why people think that I think differently today on some matters from Tinubu means that we are enemies. I can't figure that out. It's just something that has fundamentally gone wrong in thinking in Nigeria. So my evaluation of any government is based on basic principles. What kind of policy choices they are making? And I'm glad my friend, Dr. Kalu Dikakalu, KIK, I saw an interview that he gave recently on, and he was being asked about the policies of devaluation, opening up. Look, nobody has disagreed on. I was one of those who was shouting, remove subsidy from get-go. But how it was removed was wrong, in my opinion. It was done more to shout to Washington, look, we're doing that thing you want us to do, than we're trying to do something in the better interest of the long-term good of the Nigerian economy. Because first and foremost, my view has always been that 60% of the so-called subsidy in Nigeria was corruption. Corruption in the NNPC, which is very widespread. I'm glad this government is now uncovering some of it. If you remove corruption, 60% of subsidy will have gone. Then you will then deal with the issue of phasing. The people in Washington are not stupid. They may ask you, do this. But they know that you have to intelligently look at your situation and implement it in a way that will be effective. Look, again, on that, I always go back to the Asian financial crisis of 1997. I was at the World Bank annual meeting in Hong Kong, October 1997. And I flew straight from Hong Kong to Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia and spent a study tour at Bank Negara, Malaysia. Bank Negara is the central bank of Malaysia, trying to understand what developments affected the way that the current account deficits opened up for Malaysia. And I saw the Prime Minister of Malaysia, Mahathir Mohamad, the Deputy Prime Minister, who was also Finance Minister, take different positions. By the way, that gentleman, I think, is the current Anwar Ibrahim, current Prime Minister in Malaysia today. Anwar Ibrahim was promoted by Western journalists as the man who saw things more like from Washington's point of view. And Mahathir was very clear and strong on how he wanted to approach the same problems. Interestingly, I left Kuala Lumpur and headed to Jakarta to look at the same issues from the Indonesian point of view. What I know for sure is that ultimately, even the IMF admitted that Mahathir's point of view were the ones that got the thing done. Malaysia was the first country to escape the Asian financial crisis. But at that time, they called him all kinds of names. They gave the floor to George Soros to insult him in Hong Kong at that World Bank annual meeting. The first time a private citizen was given a platform to insult the head of state. But Mahathir didn't mind. He took it on. And I told this story many times. The day that I arrived in Jakarta, on my desk in the hotel I checked into, Time Magazine, Newsweek, guess who was on the cover? One of them, Anwar Ibrahim. The moment I saw it, I said, "Chai, this will have killed Anwar Ibrahim." I immediately sat down and wrote an op-ed piece, which I faxed to the Guardian. It was titled "The End of Anwar Ibrahim." You will not believe what happened. A few weeks later, Anwar Ibrahim was removed as prime minister, accused of sodomy and all kinds of things. The story is a very long one, we all know. So the truth, naked truth there is that there are so many different ways we could have done what they did with better outcomes for Nigeria. Doesn't mean the ideas were bad, but they just didn't do it the right way. And why didn't they do it the right way? I think they were too hasty. They didn't consult much. If you consult much, you will see that the ideas are in the system that can help you do things better.
Prof, if we look at governance in Nigeria, we have a 4-year tenure whenever an election is won, right?
Mm.
So whenever an election is won, Prof, we have a 4-year tenure. And that is akin to someone who has gone to university to study a degree. Now, after 2 years, one would have known if you're going to make a first class, if you're going to make a second class, or you're going to come out with a pass. At least you have a rough idea. Now, let's take it that the exam has been done in the last 2 years. If you are to rate the APC government in the last 2 years based on the economic policy and its effect on the Nigerian citizens, how would you rate this government from one? Obviously, the way as a professor, you know how you mark your students. Would you think that they've performed below or above average? From a scale of 1 to 10, do you think the government has done well? What will be your score?
To be very honest with you, as a professor, where I fail the most is in grading. I don't like grading. In fact, because I've always been a senior professor, one of the things that I do is I look for a junior person to do the grading. I don't grade. I was trapped, by the way. I was teaching a class here in the US the last couple of months. It's a graduate class in a very senior program, and I had to deal really for the first time in nearly 30 years of academic teaching, having to grade myself. Because in LBS, they will tell you I've never graded. I just find some other colleague who deals with that kind of matter.
In this case,
no, hold on, I'm going
you're
to
stuck with me here.
Yeah. So, my central concern, if I were to play opposition politics to score points, I would tell you everything that makes it an F or a D or a C. My central concern is Nigeria needs to be built up, and the political class hasn't even come to an understanding of what is before them. If you look at what happened in South Africa, when ANC lost that complete majority for the first time, how did Ramaphosa react? He went to a government of national unity that allowed for bringing other perspectives of South Africa's interests into the way they think policy in the country. I am deeply concerned by a failure of elite in Nigeria. So it's easy to call it Bola Tinubu's problem or this person's problem, but there's a failure of elite in Nigeria. And the elite isn't thinking Nigeria and how far down Nigeria has fallen. I was very saddened when Akinwumi Additional suggested, correctly by the way, that Nigerians were down to quality of life worse than at independence. And if you use as measure GDP per capita, which he suggested was down to $824 compared to what it was back then, my favorite measure actually really is industrialization. If you look at how Nigeria went from literally zero industrialization in 1956, when self-government came, to by independence 20% of GDP, you will see what serious-minded politicians can do in a short period of time.
Correct.
We've not seen that happen. And it is really a crisis of elite, not a crisis of Bola Tinubu. And we need to score this elite D-, the political class. People are dying, people are hungry, and they have failed to focus. Instead, they think that all the shenanigans of sharing booty, whether it's National Assembly or this place or that place, really amounts to progress. It isn't. We've got to call ourselves to order and say, look, how do we as an elite account for the responsibility, the charge of privilege in Nigeria. That is a major crisis.
Prof, you talked about lack of elite consensus. I would argue in that line. And would you then agree that which we could refer to as elite consensus is the inability of the elite or the ruling class to create what the argument that has been posited by Professor Kingsley Moghalu, which he says as the worldview of a nation. One of his books, he argued about the worldview of a nation. The Germans call it the Weltanschauung. Yeah, Weltanschauung. So, if you look at that, is it that the elite, are kind of a collection of adults that are fascinated by fanciful cars and jets, and that have failed in really sitting down, engage the brain to really say, this is the direction we have to move as a nation. Now, and in that failure, do you consider that we failed, or that the elites have failed as a result of the way Nigeria was fused together from various ethnic nationalities? What do you think it's as a result of that elite consensus failure?
All of it contributes, but elite consensus fails because people have failed to be leaders. That's why government matters, and those who are in power need to take their big share, because they can play a better role if they are so minded. And let me run through it for you. At self-government, at dawn of self-government, there was a rush to develop from the regions. The regions were the real drivers of development in the early 1960s. Let's take 3 or 4 issues that are my favorites. Education. Again, Western Nigeria jumped ahead, recognizing the power and importance of education with the vision of Chief Obafemi Awolowo. The Eastern region responded, and the story, which I repeated very often, of the clash between Chief Jerome Udoji and the Premier, Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, because Nnamdi Azikiwe wanted now universal basic primary education, as Western region was implementing, and the new PAMSEC in finance, Udoji, thought they didn't have the money, and therefore they needed a new approach, maybe something different. And Zik went to Parliament and accused him of sabotaging his government. And we know what that triggered. We know how it was eventually resolved. Udoji offered to resign, and so on and so forth. But it shows the competition to bring education to the people. Same thing with manufacturing. Keja Industrial Estate, response, Aba, Transamadi in Port Harcourt from the east. Then Kaduna in Kakuri. We know how the Sadauna, brought in the Hong Kong Chinese, looking at the fact that cotton was an endowment in northern Nigeria, and how Kaduna became the hub of Nigeria's textile industry. All of these things were layered on federalism. And this was the basis of the conversation at Lancaster House. Now, when the military intervened in 1966, nature of military structure is centralizing. And so the ministry, whether they said Iran wanted to unitarize or they didn't want it, eventually military government had only one way to go, unitary kind of government. Now, as collapsing federalism came, so came oil revenues. With oil revenues coming up by 1973, when the Arab-Israeli Yom Kippur War led to a quadrupling of oil prices. There was so much money, so the federal government, which took over. It used to be that Eastern region would collect the revenues on oil and send 50% to the federal government. But now, the soldiers, the big general at the center, says, bring the money. It's the center that gives you. And they got to a point where the oil-producing states, and Kalu Idika, who spoke recently, will recall that we as concerned professionals had him in a workshop we had, and he made the point as minister at the time that for impact, real impact, oil-producing countries were getting less than 2% derivation. By the time you remove the special projects at Jakarta, aluminum smelter, this and this and that, Abuja, what they actually got was less than 2%. Now, federalism was killed. And I talk very often of the dangerous alchemy of soldiers and oil. The alchemy of soldiers and oil produced in Nigeria a situation that Richard Joseph basically describes as bureaucratic prebendalism. The top general sharing prebends to vassals. And this killed production in Nigeria. The challenge of Nigeria is that we don't produce anymore. Everybody is just struggling to get a share of that thing which comes from oil. Whereas if you go back to the 60s, you will see, I just give an example of manufacturing, how Kaduna was the hub of Nigeria's textile industry. Textiles provided the biggest source of employment in the country outside of government and all of that. So you will see there's no question in my mind that the way that our structure has gone has been part of the reason that we have slipped back very badly.
So how do we, I mean, in 1 minute, if you may, how do we create, because again, and I tend to agree with Professor Mogalo here, that without necessarily creating that, it's just like someone who hasn't done a foundation, without necessarily creating a worldview for the Nigerian society. If you look at how Singapore leapfrogged, at some point, Singapore had to sit down and say, these are things that we must do. And, like, military formation went to work, ensured that happened. How do we ensure that in this case that it happens in Nigeria because it appears we would, if that is not done, we only just keep going to election, go to court, go to the street, and we might see next generation come and the cycle still continues. So those that understand this, how do we, maybe that's part of what your shadow government is going to help do. How do we help redefine that everybody is on the same page, that people are mobilized, that people actually understand? Because people make argument that our laws, that Nigeria has enough law, both electoral and whatever, that's actually its implementation and the people even understanding the law and imbibing them. So what is it that you think we can do to help?
One of the basic failures of the current order is that political parties have been a disaster. The APC appeared on the scene really out of a lecture that I gave in 2012. And the title of the lecture, not chosen by me, Leadership Newspapers, was Political Parties. And I spoke at that lecture, and all the leaders of those who formed the APC, all the major leaders, were present that day at the Ladikwali Hall. I said, one of the first and most important duties of political parties is the socialization of a generation of people into a certain understanding of a particular way of solving problems. And so one particular party will set up ideas, ideology as they tend to call it, say this is the way we can solve problems in our country. And they begin to socialize people who are joining the party, socialize the people generally. And so people have that Weltanschauung. You speak German, I don't speak it so well. And so that worldview makes them engage in conversation that is rational. Again, another German is more famous for talking about this, the philosopher of the public sphere, Jürgen Habermas.
Yeah, Habermas,
Habermas will tell you that democracy makes sense when it meets modernity in rational public conversation. We don't have that taken in Nigeria.
Keyword rational.
Yeah.
Keyword
we don't have rational conversation in Nigeria. Politicians, first of all, don't even understand what the issues are. So how are they going to rationally convince people about it? So what do? They get some young boys on the internet to insult everybody who doesn't speak their language. And so there's no rationality in the conversation, and we all just keep insulting each other and nothing. We have a tragic class of people in politics. Many of them should never have entered political life in a normal society. But that's part of the damage that happened to us as a result of military rule. Somehow we have to solve that problem at some point if we're going to make any progress as a country. So this lack of rational public conversation prevents the education and socialization of society into where to travel. Singapore did remarkably well at it. If there's any place I studied to death, literally Singapore. And you know, when people say policies, laws, there is nothing that Singapore did that Nigeria did not do, at least in terms of the policy announced. But the results were always completely different. I give you an example. We often talk about Singapore's ascendancy as the result of forced savings. Which forced savings? One remarkable forced saving that drove investment and growth in Singapore was the HDB, Housing Development Board of Singapore. And we had the same housing fund. Where did our housing fund go? We had our pension fund. Where did the money go? How was it deployed? Outcomes completely different in Singapore from the way it was in Nigeria because of values, the values of those who provided leadership. Values shape human progress. You can make any laws you like unless the appropriate values accompany them. That's what you guys call implementation. You know, I don't agree with this. Implementation is a problem. I call it nonsense. Because if you're going to make good policy, you should anticipate the things that will make it difficult to implement.
To work,
so, yeah. If you don't anticipate it and you say problem is implementation, you're talking nonsense. You don't understand what you're doing.
Correct.
So the problem is not implementation. The problem is that we didn't get the policy right ab initio. Because knowing the kinds of people that we have, we shouldn't make the kinds of policies that allow a minister to say and I'm giving you an example, true story. I know the people personally in one of those forced savings areas many years ago. The minister is dead, so it's not a problem. The minister's mother died, and he said to the man in charge of NPF or what, your contribution to the burial is so much naira, and the guy went, Honorable Minister, where am I supposed to find that money from? The minister says to him, if you don't know how to find that kind of money, you shouldn't be in that position. So this is what made the difference between where Singapore got to and where we got to. And until we can sensitize our people to that, we are not serious. We are all dressed up with nowhere to go.
It appears we all have this, we will all agree that in order to create a worldview, that's going to be a long shot. However, in the urgency of now, when we talk about today on the opposition coalition and political strategy, with the recent talks of a coalition involving Alhaji Atiku Abubakar, His Excellency Mr. Peter Obi, Nasser El-Rufai, gaining traction, how do you assess the visibility of these alliances, given the historical fragmentation of opposition parties in Nigeria? Do you believe the reported adoption of the ADC as a platform that can unify the leaders and resonate with Nigerians in order to kick the backside of the current ruling party come 2027?
What I have always found problematic with Nigerian politics is the focus on people. Atiku Abubakar, Peter Obi, it should be on a clear way of delivering progress to the Nigerian people. When you agree to that clear way of delivering it, you look at attributes of players. Which person, for this moment, might not be wrong, is appropriate. It's just a matter of timing. I can tell you, for example, even though I ran in 2007, I was hoping Atiku Abubakar would win in 2007. Several years later, I would not vote for Atiku Abubakar for different reasons. People have their configurations for different times, different purposes.
Yeah.
I have, for example, very close personal friendship with all of these people. And I'm not going to say, this man is my friend, that man is my enemy, or no. The question is, what does Nigeria desperately need now? That's one. Secondly, if there's an agreement that must be reached by people who are coalescing, it is that this business of one man, that is what kills us. That one man, we say, okay, Buhari, he, is the ultimate anti-corruption. And we say, okay, at least if the only thing that he does is end corruption, we'll make progress. Because he was one man, it ended up being damaged. Okay. We must have collective responsibility. All people in that leadership team must be able to hold accountable. And I'm not afraid to say this. I have been a friend of Tinubu for a long time. When he called me and said, let us go to Buhari, I was the one saying to him, let's go to Buhari, because Chivolu Falaye was saying to me, we need Buhari. When he then called me and said, let's go to Buhari, I said to him, I've now given up on Buhari. I said to after the 2011 election, I said to him, I've given up on Buhari. He said to me, well, so I said to him, why don't you go? Because I'm sure you will fail. He said, okay. So, and they went. When they came back the first time, I told him, I said, look, why don't you suggest to Buhari to nominate somebody from his state that is his own person? I even went as far as suggesting to him, Usman Bugaje, tell Buhari to nominate Usman Bugaje, both from Katsina. And because his style, it does not work for today's Nigeria. And I said to him, so what happened at the meeting? He said, when he wanted to raise that, Chivakonde pulled his Sokoto under the table. He said, no, it's not yet time. We say that's how we ended up with Buhari. I'm going to be now open to tell all my story, because I've been keeping quiet on all of these things. We ended up with Buhari and got that one-man rule and got damaged. So whatever it is that all these people who are lining up are thinking, none of them should have the kind of power to do damage as the top guns who have come before them have done. Collective responsibility must be the battle cry for change in Nigeria.
You're talking about the collective responsibility for the coalition. So,
yes.
I mean, again, and at the same time, you do not subscribe to the, the notion of personalities within those that coming together to coalesce, right? So, you frown at personalities, but you want collective responsibility. Now, again, the ordinary citizen on the streets of Kaduna, Lagos, Abuja, Aba, they are not part of this coalition. Again, those that are coming for the coalition are still those, that no matter how you look at it, these are still these individuals. It happened, you are part of the formation of the APC. So at some point, like you said, they all came together to form something before they even talk about who's going to be the presidential candidate. And that same thing, it appears the same template is being repeated now. What would you then advise the coalition, bearing in mind the things you experienced firsthand in 2013 and 2014? What will be that pitfall you're going to warn clearly to the coalition to say, here are the gray areas, from my experience, if you do this, we are all doomed?
I already explained part of it, this business of one man not thinking that he's a messiah to save the world and everything just on him. He is just an arrowhead of a collective team which will hold itself accountable. I've had occasion to be at one or two of those meetings, and I said it. I remember after I give I don't know what I will call it now, at one of those meetings, one former governor, senator who was there said, Professor, this is a masterclass, but you are too idealistic. And I laughed, because that's how we always reduce things that we find difficult to digest, is idealistic. Yeah. It is like our idealism that has brought us to where we are.
Exactly.
That is what has brought us to where we are. So if we centralize people, if we really love people, I wrote a book many years ago, an autobiography, that was titled "To Serve is to Live." I dared to use it to play it. I said love is to lead. You cannot be effective in leading if you don't truly love the people. And I don't mean what you say to get support. I mean, if your heart doesn't bleed when you see one person suffering on the street, you're not a leader. And if people feel like that and go into leadership with that, then they will think it. I mean, look, my personal mantra, if you will, and forgive my faith and orientation, it comes from a Latin phrasing of a Gregorian chant. Ubi caritas et more, Deus ibi est. Where there is charity and there is love, dear God is. We're not going to build a great nation if there is no charity and there's no love in the hearts of those who look to lead.
Prof, you've talked about ideas, and you talked about charity, and you talk about love. Now, I'm trying to put this all together as something that the people behind the coalition must do for us to get it right. And I'm still sorry, but I'm still kind of, in clearer terms, hundreds of Nigerians watching us now. I'm just trying to see if we're able to break it down, because okay, let me treat this the other way. Does it mean that there was no clear it was there was no clear idea when they talked about forming APC? Is it that there was no love, or okay, there was no clear ideology?
The only thing that mattered was power, obviously. I mean, let me give you an example. The so-called APC roadmap was written on my dining table. The incumbent requested the current finance minister and the former vice president that they, with me, work out a roadmap for and we spent a lot of time every other day over several weeks working on this roadmap. Now, the only thing that I can observe clearly, and it was not implemented as I had hoped, that Buhari government tried to introduce from the roadmap was an idea that I put on the table that was borrowed from Brazil. And that is from the Bolsa Familia, the so-called distributable cash transfers.
Okay, the cash transfer
that went to they call it different names: farmer, trader money,
trader money, and conditional
cash transfer. Sorry, I said distributable. Conditional cash transfers. Most of the things that we talked about were critical for getting a caring society that was producing, and this is a caring, producing society. Growth matters. You must drive economic growth. But people must see their leaders as caring enough. You can't have leaders who are running around in Rolls Royces when people cannot eat. It just doesn't send the message that makes for commitment. You cannot have a National Assembly that is sharing money the way the 10th Assembly is sharing and contributing so little to how people are governed in their best interest and have progress. No, it is not possible. So we've got to come to fundamentals. We've got to say to ourselves, look, these things, some things are not acceptable. We can't do things anymore like this. If we did that, we would go very far, because Nigerians are actually very easy to lead when they see example. The problem is that those who lead them say, do as I say, but don't do as I do.
Prof, my last question on this coalition will be: you have joined some of the meetings, as you've just as you just said here. Do you, in your heart of heart, believe, from what you have heard, from what you have seen, that there will be a coalition come 2027?
Oh, I am always an optimist. And again, I believe in deepening democracy. I think that is important for democracy that happen. So I am persuaded that there will be one, there should be one, and there most very, very likely will be one. But I say it should not just be for the sake of grabbing power. It must be for transforming lives.
Before I ask you the last question, there is a personal question here that someone have requested that when I posted the interview on Twitter, someone had requested that I ask you this question. So could you please tell us exactly that when the APC was formed, you indicated you bought form to run for the governorship of Delta State. Is that correct?
That's not correct. But I did. Let me tell the Delta story, and this is my challenge in Nigeria. When the APC was formed, I didn't plan to run for anything at all. I just wanted something that would move Nigeria forward to take place. Several years into the government, 3 years into the government, I received a delegation. These were not people that I even knew at all. In fact, they didn't know how to reach me. And I can, again, part of the problem is Nigerians don't read. I've written a book on this experience. It's titled "Why Not?" That's the main title. I talked about state capture, creeping fascism, and the criminal hijack of politics in Nigeria in that book. Now, a group of people from Delta State, and that's what fascinated me about it, which is why I listened to them. Almost all of them, not from my own ethnic group. They were majorly old boys of Ughelli Government College. Like I mentioned some of their names. They were led by a gentleman called Johnny Esike. We're looking for how to reach me, to say to me, look, we need you to rescue Delta State. Because they didn't know me at all, they reached out to somebody who went to school with them and said to him, look, we know you should know this guy. And Philip, who was this gentleman, had not been in touch with me for a little while. He moved to the UK and then come back. And Philip called somebody else who worked with him at IMB back in those days, Tony Nachita, and said to Tony, look, I have some friends who are trying to reach Pat Utomi. And Tony Nachita gave Philip my number. Philip called me and then said he wanted to come and see me. He had a group of people who wanted to see me. And then they arrived to see me. Delegation of about, maybe 8 people or so. And they tried to make a case for me to come and, as they said, rescue Delta. My response to them at that first meeting was, look, I, first of all, have never played local politics. Unfortunately for me, or fortunately, I have been a man at the center. In fact, Femi Falana had said to me, why don't you run for Senate from Lagos? And I had said, identity politics in Nigeria. I said, no. You will do the worst possible thing if you go back to Delta to run for anything from Delta, because you are a Lagosian. People know you in Lagos. That's where they will respect your talent. And so when these people arrived, I had this in my head, and I said to them, look, I really don't, even though I know Delta, I know what can be done. I've served on several groups that were set up by Delta state governors, from Ibori to Oduaha. But I cannot say to you that I'm a grassroots person. They say, but you've been talking about sacrifice and this. That meeting didn't finish that day because it was something that I had to chew. I was in a rush. I didn't feel like. Then we had the second meeting, then the third meeting, and I told them, look, here are my constraints. First of all, there's a joke that I took from Alan Alda, the actor, from many years ago. He said that the most dangerous thing in the world is to be famous without being rich. Because if you are famous, people will think you have money, and they will expect certain things. And then if you don't have money, then I said to them, look, I may be famous, but I'm not rich. And I don't have the resources to go and throw away in this kind of exercise. They said to me, don't even think of one kobo. We will be responsible for this, that. Anyway, in the end, they persuaded me to try and get involved in Delta. In some ways, I think it was very useful in terms of what I learned, but in other ways, it was not probably appropriate to give in what I told them from beginning about whether I related enough to that base. In the book that I wrote, I recall a conversation with Chief Sonny Odogu, who was easily one of the people who could bankroll this thing. It was at the birthday, I think it was his 70th birthday or so of the wife of the former group managing director of NNPC, Dr. Thomas John. And Chief Odogu said to me, Utomi, wasn't you run for governor of Delta State? You're too big for governor. What are you doing with governor? You're too big for governor. I said to him, Idahaba, I don't take life as big for anything or small for anything. I've been asked by people to say that I could make a difference in the state. And I feel this moral pressure. I wish I wasn't running for it, but I feel it's moral pressure, so I go through with it. In the end, what happened? It's a remarkable story of a non-election. Hadas Shomole was a good friend of mine, or is a good friend of mine, whichever you call it. They crafted this mess that was designed. And you know what I am? One of the reasons I'm pissed with Tinubu and Oshimole till tomorrow. They knew, I talked to both of them about how I really didn't feel like doing that thing. Bola Tinubu said to me, go, when I said I'm a federal man, in fact, Akonde said, yes, you're a federal man, you're a center man. What are you going to do in Delta? I said, yes. Tinubu said, look, if you go to Delta, when you finish Delta, we'll bring you to the center. That he will support me running for president in future after I run for Delta. Bola Tinubu should say whether it's true or false. Did we have this conversation? If any of them had just hinted to me, just a little hint, I beg, don't worry about that Delta. It would have been enough excuse for me to not even bother. But in the end, all of them played a role in, the sham primaries that was supposed to take place. And I thought, okay, I have had enough of this nonsense. Let me just leave them alone. That's what happened.
Okay, so the narrative that the venue of the primary was moved without your knowledge, is that accurate?
It's not accurate, but it's what was intended, and I can tell the story fully. In Nigeria, whenever you've been a governor, you're now head of anything you go into in that state. So Udwan suddenly joined APC. And so he was now the, I guess, leader of the party. And so 2 nights or so before the primaries, we stopped by his place in Asaba. And he told the story of how they told him that they wanted to move the venue to somewhere near Warri to make it more convenient for the person they had chosen would be the person who would run. Which in a way was quite funny, because I remember when we talked about that person, several leaders of the APC from Boss Mustafa and all of them told me, that guy, no, they can't trust him. He has taken advantage of them twice before. They can't trust him. No. But anyway, as it worked out between Adams and whoever else, they had decided that he's the one that they would support. And like I said, if they had just hinted me, I would just have left the thing, So Duan said they were going to think that they said that he then warned them to say that, look, if you do that, the APC secretariat in Asaba will be on fire. So literally the day before the election, they moved it back to Asaba. So we knew the venue. I knew the venue. But when we got to the meeting with the delegation that came from Abuja to organize the elections, one general, somebody, I don't remember his name again, it was clear that they had a mandate. They refused everything that the law said to do. Come on, Prof, we're brothers now. Let's just go and do it, brother. I said, this is what we're supposed to do. Omana DJ, who was with me, Ibe Katiku, who was there. And after they did, little brother, let's just go to the place. Some of my friends and relatives blocked my car and said, you can't go there. You see what people are planning to do. It's clear. There's no point in it. So, yes, this is what happened. It's not that I went to another venue as they... And they themselves were the ones who probably put out that deceptive meeting notice there. What you call fake news. That I went
So eventually, when your car was blocked, you didn't go ahead to participate?
No, I just drove home and drove back to Lagos.
Even better. So in rounding up here, Prof, another question from Obasi Ofia says, if they are making, what are the plans, if any, would the shadow government be helping in pushing for more electoral reform before 2027?
Absolutely. We're actually putting out so many documents that we'll put on the table and put before the Nigerian people on electoral process reforms.
Okay, so finally here, Prof, lessons from the past and vision for the new Nigeria. Reflecting on your previous political engagements, what lessons have you learned and, that are influencing your current strategies? And again, what is your overreaching vision for Nigeria, and how does the shadow government fit into this vision?
You see, Mazi, in February next year, I'm going to be 70.
Wow.
And I said to my children long ago that at 70, I retire. And I said to them, if at 75, they hear that I've attended a meeting, political or any of those kinds of things, they should come and take me forcibly from there and declare me of unsound mind. That I give them the authority and bring me back and chain me inside my house. One day during the campaigns, some jocular conversations started up somewhere with Peter Obi and I said to Peter Obi, by the way, you know that I will be too old to serve in your government. Because I think these things we should get younger people to do. That the only kind of position I can even accept is to be a nice tea drinking ambassador in Washington. I said that to him. So, that was even 3 years ago. So really, quite frankly, from my personal point of view, all that I want is to be able to get young people to better understand how to run a country and run it well. I'm not looking for anything. I mean, it is a miracle with everything Nigeria has done to me after 50 years of struggle to make it better that I am where I am, which tells you that God is extraordinary, because they've tried to affect my business interests. They've tried to, everything has been done to be negative because I wanted the country to be better. But can you imagine that in spite of all of that, I was able to educate 5 children. They all went to the best universities in the world they could get into. And that's all I ever wanted to do in life. Maybe I worked 5 times as hard as my contemporaries. Thank God I can speak English, and it's so easy to get out of Nigeria. In fact, there's a joke between General Buhari and myself. Every time General Buhari saw me in those days, he would say, "Professor, you're in Nigeria." I would say yes, because the joke starts with the fact that I'm always out of the country. All I needed to do to stay alive was just fly to some part of the world and speak English for 45 minutes, and I'll earn enough to pay school fees for my children. I am so thankful to God that He has allowed me such a life in spite of everything Nigeria has tried to do to me. Still, I love Nigeria, but the time to retire is around the corner.
Thank you very much, Prof. This is a very fantastic place to anchor this conversation with you. It is my pleasure. And once more, thank you for being my guest this evening.
I'm glad I could be.
Thank you very much. So that has been my conversation with Professor Pat Utomi, a former presidential advisor, presidential candidate, and a renowned political economist. He recently unveiled a shadow government under the Big Tent coalition. This initiative is aimed to monitor government actions and propose alternative solutions across critical sectors. However, as you all know, the Department of State Security Services has filed a lawsuit against him. As he has explained during the course of our conversation, he has given us insight as to the reason why this happened. And I feel so glad that he was able to join me. We had technical issues at the beginning, but thank God we have it overcome that last. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm still your host, Mazi. It's okay. And we'll say good night. Bye from here.